All right,
In my,
we're on.
oh, great. Well, I'm in my fucking night robe.
That's how it, makes you more relatable. So actually, all right. So there was like a ton of stuff. There's a ton of stuff I wanted to talk to you about, um, and it's all kind of slightly half baked, but I think there might be something here, and because I'm still on my kick of trying to understand Trump voters,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like looking at kind of like all these like articles and like Facebook posts and everything that's coming out post the election, and I think that this is also something I think we might disagree on because it sort of like gets it, kind of like one of the like fundamental ways in which kind of we think about people differently. Whereas I tend to think they're like a lot more rational than you tend to
Oh
think
yeah.
they are. And everybody's like thinking about Trump voters and they're like, oh man, like Trump voters, like they're completely immune to facts, like they just don't care what's true, or uh, they seem kind of like they just maybe I think to some sort of people on the left, like they seem maybe like unbelievably stupid, like sort of like to the point where you just like can't even understand why they would do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is kind of makes it almost impossible for there to be kind of any kind of like political engagement. Like most people are saying something like, or I see a lot of people saying something like, well, in order to like make the country better, we need to wait for this like Fox News viewer contingent to just die off, right? And that's like, if anything like that could be indicative of like a failure of democracy, it's that you just want to wait for your opponents to just die out. Like there's no
Yeah.
possibility of conversation there. Okay, so here's my theory that I want to I want your thoughts about.
Okay.
So I think that if for any like almost any long-standing political debate, fundamentally like underlying it is a truly difficult question, a truly difficult problem. That whether you're a Trump voter or a Clinton voter or a Bernie voter, whatever it is, the disagreement is fundamentally around a problem that no side has a good answer for, and
Mm-hmm.
that disagreement. So like, there's no like reality to the idea. I mean, well, no, important reality to the idea that like a Trump voter is like just simply unintelligent, and that's why they're voting for Trump. So like, let's take like a standard you know debate, right? So like, take like abortion, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you have all these people on the left who are like pro women's rights, all these people on the right who are like pro life, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it really fundamentally centers around this idea: is it morally acceptable to abort a fetus or an embryo, and how does that weigh against things like health concerns of the mother, or sort of like her freedom to do what she chooses with her body, et cetera, right? And this sort of like balancing values question is an extremely actually difficult question, right? There's no like, you could try and find an objective answer to it, and you could talk about things like utilitarianism and sort of like the potential good and potential happiness of the embryo or the fetus, or you could talk about that of the mother, or you could talk about people's rights, all of these types of things, and that's not,
Mm-hmm.
there's no obvious answer there, right? um, or you could talk about I think gun rights,
Mm-hmm.
great example, right? And you can talk about personal liberty versus the probable outcome of people getting shot who don't need to get shot.
Yeah. Can I
And
interject at this point, just real
yeah, yeah,
quickly,
absolutely.
and just say that, like, at this point, I'm completely with you. I think that there's this attitude that a lot of people have on all sides, which is kind of like a chauvinism of their perspective. And it basically goes something like this, like that other side is objectively stupid, right? I mean, there's a funny Onion article that was like, if only that other side could have my exact perspectives and experiences and life path, they would be able to see things. They would come to the right conclusion. And so, like any tendency to dismiss one's like the other side for being like just objectively incapable of thinking rationally or reasoning or thinking the right way, um, I think is a myth, and it's basically just a way to make ourselves feel better because it's a way to dismiss what you're calling attention to, which is the objective difficulty of some of the root problems and the fact that there is like no real simple solution to it. That's
Right.
why I think that I'm like, if anyone thinks that there is a simple solution to abortion or to gun rights or to Israel Palestine or whatever, I just like can't take that person seriously almost.
Uh,
If they think that it's just that it's easy, that it's an easy problem to have, and if that the only reason why we're having a fight about it is because one side is dumb.
right. Right. And I mean, one of the things that, maybe I'll find a disagreement with you in here somewhere, which is that like, um, I would take it to this next level and you say like, well, certainly there's these elements of political disagreement that have a lot to do with sort of like culture and like tribalism and who
Mm-hmm.
are your people and what do they tend to believe, right? But I think that those things only tend to get purchase on people once they hit a hard problem. That is like, okay, I can think about really straightforward things in a perfectly rational way. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if I want to drink a water, I can like reason enough to like go get up and like pour myself a glass of water and take a drink. And that's like ideal standard, rational behavior, right? And everybody can do that. It doesn't matter whether you're a Trump voter or you're like a Clinton voter. It's just once you get to a hard problem, like you sort of people can make this imperceptible shift from you know responding to evidence, reasoning through problems, to sort of just adopting a heuristic or adopting a sort of like team mentality or whatever
Yeah,
the sort of like general
adopting a
view of that group
slogan
is.
or yeah.
Right. So like you say, well, for anything that's straightforward, I can do that. But now I've got to a hard problem. And my hard problem now is uh, do I trust Fox News or do I trust MSNBC? Right? That's a hard problem. How do I verify, a
Mm-hmm.
story I'm getting from one source versus a story I'm getting from another source? Can't do it. Oh, well, imperceptible change. I just start believing, I start trusting whoever the people around me trust or whoever the people I trust, whoever they trust. Um,
Yeah, I think
things
maybe
like
what you're
that.
calling attention to is like this. Some people talk about like the need for ontological security, or the drive for certainty. It's very difficult to go through your life and recognize that everything is a hard problem. And that, you're like, could you imagine how crazy making that would be? This is why I like am so neurotic and have such difficult time making decisions, is because I'm trying to think like through both sides or whatever. And that can be very draining. And so people's drive for certainty makes them adopt these heuristics, through either like tribal loyalty or whatever, in order to kind of like soothe the anguish that comes with those hard decisions. It's just so much easier to just say like, to just say like, yeah, Fox News is clear and balanced, or
Right, right.
or Fox News is idiotic or whatever, and all those people are idiots. It kind of like satisfies one's need for certainty in the face of like crushing ambiguity in the world. I'm really happy today.
is how no one can go through the life with this crushing existential angst
But
and
I
sense of.
think like I mean what political scientists at least would say is so the relationship that it seems like what you're saying is that like a hard problem is maybe like the necessary condition for these types of like
Yeah, I think that's what I'm
travel.
saying.
Um, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, in some sense, like it can be kind of co-constitutive or whatever because those kind of like group cleavages then make things more the problem harder, right? So you originally have like, for instance, Israel Palestine, you have like a hard problem. Anyone who says that that problem is like just reducible to people's hatred on the other side is an idiot, in my opinion. I'm like, no, there are material problems. You know, it's not just a matter of like kumbaya getting everyone together to like each other. It's like, you know, you and I could like each other a lot, but if I think that this piece of land is mine and you think that the piece of land is yours, like we're going to have a problem. But then over time, like we could try to negotiate that problem, right? We could try to compromise or split it up or like reach some kind of negotiation and resolve. But if we like have so much, you know, kind of interpersonal or intergroup distrust, then those negotiations are going to be impossible,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's what you're seeing, like with to bring it back to like the Trump example is like clearly, um, yeah. So I also dismiss the idea that the Trump voters are just idiots, which they may be idiots, but it doesn't seem clear to me that they're any more idiotic than anyone else.
Yeah. And I mean,
Um,
I wonder, I mean, to what extent this is, maybe me just being optimistic, but the idea that like, if people were able to recognize the fact that there is a hard problem somewhere in the vicinity of every sort of intractable political debate, that they'd be more willing to compromise. It wouldn't be so much like, oh man, we got in office, now we need to clear out everything these other people did. Uh,
yeah, I mean that's what I try to do with my students. Isn't that what you did try to do as a teacher? You know, isn't that what makes the hallmark of a good teacher? Is to be like,
well, probably not. I mean, that's probably not what I did. But that's probably why I'm not a good teacher. That's probably why I need to get out of that business.
I mean, I think I tried to do that, you know. I tried to see like, okay, what are the stakes of this debate and what is the hard problem that's at the core of it? And how would you adjudicate that? Um, or like by what standards ought one adjudicate something?
Right.
Um, I mean, there's this. Did you ever read Adolph Reed?
No.
He's a political theorist. He might be an empirical political scientist too, but he writes a lot about like the Black radical tradition. And he was writing about like basically like the kind of Bernie versus Hillary stuff in kind of a bombastic way,
Yeah.
which I really liked reading. And he was basically like this idea that there are easy solutions and that if only like the other he was basically talking criticizing Bernie supporters, but he's like the idea that there are easy solutions and that if only, you know, other people would see and become enlightened,
Right.
you know, is like a complete myth um, that you know is comforting, but that's like ultimately dangerous because it prevents us from, you know, actually going through the work of doing compromise and negotiation and struggle.
Yeah.
Um,
I think there's one wrinkle in this that sort of occurred to me, which is that people might take a side that is truly obviously wrong,
yeah,
but do it sort of as a way of sort of, I guess, sort of like in some sense fighting a battlefield away from their weakness, kind of like preventing things from actually getting to addressing the hard problem. So for example, if you take like police brutality, right? And you see all these videos of police officers shooting unarmed black men, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems like the only reasonable position on that video, right, is that whatever the law is, that should not be legal, right? Or that police officer was certainly not fearing for his life. That guy was running away, something like that. That really, I think, the hard problem at the core of that is someone is thinking about, okay, well, how do I balance, how important is law and order to me?
Mm-hmm.
How much credit do I give someone for taking a job where, they're risking their lives trying to protect law and order? And how, much leeway do I give that person because they're human and I understand they're in a stressful job, right? And so the real question is sort of like, I think the real hard problem is, how much leeway do we give police officers versus, the sort of obvious cost in terms of, Black lives and
Yeah.
how do you balance, law and order versus social justice fundamentally? And that's the hard problem. But then in order not to have to sort of like deal with that head on, someone will just take a super hard position on something that seems really obvious, which is like, nope, that police officer was completely justified.
Yeah.
Something like that. Or like, nope, that action was completely within the boundaries of the law,
So I think I'm hearing two different questions here. The first is like a normative question, like here are these competing values. How do we adjudicate that? And I think it's a great conversation to have, and I would love to actually see that like debate in public discourse. The problem, or where we kind of like hardly ever get to that level of thinking, is then because of this like ultimately an empirical question about why people take particular positions that they do on it. Like why is that guy being like, nope, he feared for his life? Why did he take like such an unreasonable position on police brutality? Are you following me so far?
Yeah, I think so.
Um, and yes, it's a hard problem, but I also, maybe this is the point of disagreement, maybe between us, is that I don't think like I think there are like social factors at work that independent of how difficult, like objectively difficult the normative problem is, you'll just like it will breed these kind of extreme positions. Because that person isn't just in himself thinking about doesn't want to deal with the difficulty of this normative problem and thus takes the easy way out of blindly supporting the police officer. He's like in a particular social position where everyone or where if he says anything but supporting the police officer, then he might suffer social costs of his neighborhood or his community, or like that's a signal, that shows his loyalty to his social environment. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
there are like social factors here that push people to take a particular position that's independent of how. That's why I think sometimes you can get these really really silly positions that aren't any that have no like hard problem root to it. Like I imagining like freedom fries, right? Like what was that was a do you remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe you could say like the root of that was like how do unilateralism versus how much do we get France to be our ally in this war in Iraq or something.
Yeah.
Um,
That's kind of what I'm saying, is that these sort of silly positions that people take, these sort of really
yeah.
extreme sort of positions that people take, they always, like, I'm telling a particular story, which I think is sort of, it fits perfectly with some of the things you've said, which is that basically what happens is people hit a hard problem, then
Uh-huh.
social factors basically determine which way they go. If you hang out in Berkeley all the time, then basically
Yeah.
What you think there is that social justice in this case is obviously more important than, you know, law and order. Or you have some sort of position, you say something like, well, actually, law and order isn't really supported by, you know, giving police this kind of freedom, something like this. But you hit a hard problem, you take one direction for social reasons, and then, you know, people will engage in lots of different types of strategies in order to sort of like, you know, protect their position that they've now endorsed. And that might have to do with sort of like, you know, taking these stands on things that are only sort of tangentially related to your original normative hard problem. Or that sort of like are, you know, ways of building barriers before you even, people have to defeat
Yeah.
before you even get to the discussion of the real underlying hard problem.
Sure. I've seen this a lot in the last few days with the Israeli settlements. Like to me, as someone who's like admittedly like not an expert on Israel Palestine, like I consider myself an outsider of on that issue. In the sense that I don't really feel like I have a clear position, at least to me, that I cannot see how anyone can support the settlements.
Right.
You know, it seems like so obvious to me that you would condemn that as a barrier to a two-state solution, right? And I'm like, how can anyone, you know, support or like condemn a condemnation of the settlements, meaning like support the
Right.
settlements? And then I see the arguments, and no one is actually really supporting the settlements. They're just pivoting. You know, they're like well, it's not really this issue about the settlements. It's about this will if you give the Palestinians anything, then they'll have more leverage to bomb us, or it's hypocritical. It's like all kind of resorting to all these ad hominem attacks without actually looking at the hard issue, so to speak, of the settlements themselves.
Right.
I don't know. Well, I'm sorry, Max, that we didn't come to more of a disagreement about that.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. I guess that means that, like, what does that tell us about, about both us and how much we agree on stuff, even in the most fundamental ways, but also like all this Trump voter hate. Is there something like legitimately hateable about Trump voters?
I mean, I like struggle with this in the sense like there are some. So I'm struggling with two sides in me right now, which is one is like, how do you? So we can have this conversation where we recognize that there are like actual real hard problems, that there's no obvious solution, that it requires negotiation. It doesn't mean that it's like moral. I think we're in agreement that it's not, that it's just morally relativistic. There's like good reasons for instance, opposing police brutality. It's not like all sides are equally valid,
Right.
but they might be symptoms of like a genuinely hard problem. But then there's also this urge that might be in tension with that, of recognizing that complexity, which is like you need to take a hard stance against